Hi, it's Jerry McMullen, and I am with the Worst Comic Podcasts Ever, and I am joined today by...
Hi, Nicholas Prom.
And you are the host of...
Comic Reflections.
All right. We're kind of like our podcasts and my blogs and our it's almost like we're twin brothers from different mothers.
Yes. Like Matt Fraction and Howard Chaykin.
Yes, very much so. Just separated by a generation or two.
Yeah.
Tell me about Comic Reflections. How did that get started? What was the genesis behind your podcast? Because you kind of take a different format that every episode you're talking about different comics.
Yeah. Well, when we started out the show, I had just recently started listening to comics podcasts, things like Comic Geek Speak or whenever.
That's a great one.
It is. R.I.P. the Shiznit Pimp. But when I first started, I didn't really have a plan. And we did a lot of current comic talk on the show early on. But then we started as a feature to dive into the back issue bins and talk about some older stuff. And I really got to thinking, this is my favorite stuff. And I think this is what I want to do the show about all the time, forever.
Yeah.
So really the show's format has been to talk about some silver or bronze age, and sometimes we'll dip into the golden age, and late 80s comics, stuff you can find in the back issue bins or old things that are traded. And I was a history major in college, and so as a historian I really enjoyed digging deep in the history of comics, and that's what we do. And we like to poke fun at plot holes and wacky stuff that happens in a lot of these books. The Silver Age is rife with these wonderful goofy tropes, and I can't get enough of that stuff.
One of the things I like about your show, so many people hear comic books and they immediately go to superheroes.
Very true.
But the comics you're covering, all different genres. You're covering war comics. You've looked at the monster comics. You've looked at...
we've done some romance books. We've done westerns.
That was the one.
It's a sad thing, though, because we tend to stick with Marvel and DC and largely superhero stuff, just for a couple of logistic reasons. It's one, every time we go outside of Marvel and DC and hey, let's talk about some Gold Key or Charlton, or let's talk about the Thunder Agents from Tower, our numbers dip. People tend to gravitate towards more the classic Marvel and DC.
They go with what
superheroes.
they know with.
Yeah.
And availability plays into that. You can find Marvel and DC comics all over the place. You
and
can
find
in media, but you can also even find it in reprints.
Very true.
So
those people can go and find those stories if they want to kind of read along, which is great. And I hope we make the show entertaining, so even if you've never read that and don't have a chance to, you'll have some laughs or maybe learn something.
Yeah.
But the other thing is I like anthology comics, like the old EC horror things and things like that. We've touched on things like that, but I find it doesn't make for great show when we cover things without recurring characters. And so I've tried to stick with that, but I like to, as much as possible, go outside of just superheroes. I love Sword and Sorcery. We've been covering Arak, Son of Thunder of late, and that's an interesting book. Love anything with Roy Thomas, although love Roy, but he overwrites a little bit.
You get your money's worth out of his books.
Oh, you sure do, and it takes you probably twice as long to read a Roy book than, say, even a Jerry Conway, and I love Jerry Conway.
Just a few seconds ago, you mentioned cast of characters, and that could also apply to your podcast mates, because you rotate around between a couple of different guys.
That's right. When we're firing on all cylinders, I do one show a week with Jeff, who is an older guy. He's from North Carolina, and he's in our promo. I refer to him as the crusty curmudgeon, and boy, that is him to a T. Darren and Ruth Sutherland, the hosts of Trekker Talk and Warlord Worlds and Xenophobic. Xenozoic, excuse me, not xenophobic. Darren was asking me if that was a character that Jeff plays, and no, that is really him all the time. And I have to. we balance each other out because he's really gets on some negative trips, but it can be funny. And I'm really big on positivity.
Sure.
And then my other co-host, I don't get a Spencer on as often as I like, but we try to do once a week. And he's a friend of mine from college, and he's got a different perspective on comics too. He's a big greener.
And that's what I really like, is that everyone brings that different perspective to the conversation. You know, you each have your likes, dislikes, and you're not afraid to share those.
Right.
You know?
Jeff, his two favorite things in comics are Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen and Jack Kirby.
Yeah.
But he hated the Jack Kirby Jimmy Olsen because it wasn't those wacky Silver Age things. And so I get frustrated by that, but it gives me something to work with. I mean, you know, like, come on, it's Jack Kirby.
Yeah.
But you know, like, I don't want everything to be the same all the time. Like, Jimmy Olsen ran its course with those wacky stories, you know, making Superman cry and marrying an ape and being Hitler's astrologer.
Yeah.
But and I love that stuff.
Oh, yeah.
But
yeah.
It ran its course, and I loved Kirby just did another wild, wonderful thing with it. But it was just something different.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I've been trying to rattle in my head here, try to figure out where exactly we cross paths. I think you had reached out to us at one point shortly after we started the podcast, but I don't know if you were reaching out to us about the podcast or about my Essential Showcase blog.
You know, because at the time I reached out, I found your blog.
Okay.
Because at the time we were playing with the idea, and I decided to put the kibosh on. I'll get to that point, but with the idea of just going with the drawing from the Showcase Presents
right.
or Essential volumes, and we tried that for a while, and actually I found it kind of exhausting. And now we've moved back to just doing like a couple of random issues, and just keep it really fresh and not getting stuck in long runs of series for the most part.
Yeah.
But I stumbled on your blog, and I said, "Oh man, are we separated at birth? This is great." And then I started listening to your show as well.
Okay.
Which I enjoy quite a bit. It's probably the only podcast I listen to that's really covers current comics at all. I've been lucky enough to find a bunch of other ones to listen to that are about more like diving into the back issue bins, like mine.
Yeah. Well, I'll talk about the blog here for a second. I do a blog called Essential Showcase, where I review the Marvel Essentials and the DC Showcase Presents. At some point years ago, I somehow latched onto them and just fell in love with that concept of the black and white foam books.
Oh, they're wonderful. I mean, and for like $20, you can get 500 pages of Silver or Bronze Age comics. How can you say no?
Yeah.
I mean, they're wonderful books.
It was one of those where early 2013, I had just finished a Captain America book and was kind of looking at the numbers, and I realized that was like the 100th volume that I had read combined of the Essentials and the Showcase. And it's like, all right, I'm putting a lot of time reading these books. I ought to do something with it.
I'm glad you did, Jerry.
Yeah. So I decided on a whim, I'll start writing up reviews for these. And of course, right as I started it is basically when both companies ended publication on those lines.
Yeah,
so.
I think the last Showcase recently came out, or last couple. I think they did Unknown Soldier Volume 2, Blue Beetle came out, and I think that it was the 5th or 6th Legion of Superhero
Fifth Legion, and then the final one just came out earlier this year was Batman #6.
Oh yeah, they did. That's right.
Marvel did in the Essential line in 2013. The last volume was Hulk #7.
Okay.
So I started doing these reviews, and that kind of inspired me to read more and keep up. So at this point, I've put up upwards of 220 reviews so far.
Wow.
I probably still have another 50 to 60 books in my collection to read and or write up reviews on. Yeah. So with doing one a week, I'm still good for another year with that, and then I'll figure out what I'll do next.
Well, you know, and I think I brought this up before, and I urge you, Dark Horse has done a few phone books. They did a John Carter of Mars one, reprinting the Marvel John Carter stuff. And they've done, I think they've got about 20 volumes of Savage Sword of Conan in the phone book format. I would love it if you did those, Jerry.
Absolutely. And that was my thought, especially after reading the Marvel Essential Conan, because Marvel got one volume out before they lost the rights to Conan in the early 2000s. So I've read the first, 24, 25 issues of that. You know, so I'd love to keep that reading streak going up.
Yeah. And, and Savage Sword, it's like some of it was a reprint of the main Conan title, or a lot of it was original stuff. But unpopular opinion, I like John Buscema much more than I like Barry Windsor Smith.
Yeah.
Barry Smith is like my third favorite Conan artist because Gil Kane's stuff is so wonderful as well. So Savage Sword has a lot more for me going than that essential Conan volume.
Sure. So then, gosh, it would have been the summer of 2014. I was fortunate that two of my best friends growing up that I've known since 7th grade were also in the comics. And, I mean, the three of us, Cullen and John and myself, I mean, for early on, we were always convincing one of our parents to take us up to the comic book store. And then once we got driver's license, then we would drive ourselves up to the comic book store. And we've just always hung out reading comics. And, we go to college, we get jobs, get married, have kids, get married again, have more kids, whatever. I mean,
that'll happen.
You start losing track of each other, and then we realized, hey, we're missing out on each other. We don't get to hang out and talk comics and stuff. And it's like, what can we do to find a way to make time for each other? And it's like, all right, what if we did a podcast? And it's like, all right, well, that at least justifies us getting together once a week, and our wives won't get too upset because we're heading out and we're just talking. What's the worst that can happen with a podcast? And
right.
So we started a podcast. We call it the Worst Comic Podcast Ever. Kind of a nod to the comic book guy off of Simpsons.
Yes. Worst comic podcast ever.
You got it. And so we kind of learned as we went along. I mean, we had no clue what we were doing most of the time. Still do it most of the time. But we were doing it for about 6 months, and we realized, it's starting to pick up a following. People are listening. People are responding to us, and we're getting feedback. And it's like, all right, maybe if we put a little more effort into it, let's see what we can do. And so we fully fleshed out our blog. We started putting up original content Monday through Friday in terms of blog posts and videos and things like that. And that in turn led us being invited to different cons around our area. We're primarily based out of Kansas City, but we now have a Portland presence with Cullen being out here. Yes. We started going to cons, and we started getting invited to host panels at cons, and it's just kind of been a whirlwind trip. So 2 years later, we're up over 100 episodes, and we've hosted panels with comic legends and celebrities and people in between, and it's interesting.
Yeah, I appreciate the variety of content I get from your show, and you guys are very good at doing these panels. I'm impressed. I'm not much of an interviewer myself. Yeah. So I appreciate anyone who can do that well.
Yeah.
Being in Portland, Oregon is maybe one of the best cities in the world you could live in if you're a comic book fan.
Absolutely.
And maybe I should start branching out and trying to, get at least some of these classic comics creators on my show. That would kind of fit in my wheelhouse.
Well, in terms of the comic book presence, I mean, Dark Horse Comics has been based here for years.
Yeah, since 1987, I believe.
They just announced last month that Image Comics is going to be relocated, putting their headquarters here in Portland,
which is wonderful news.
The Comic Book Legal Defense Fund has their headquarters here.
Oh, even I didn't know that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And there's just all kinds of. It's a good hub for comic book creators. There's a lot of people. We're recording this outside of Rose City Comic Con, and there's a lot of celebrity or comic book guests in here that call this their hometown show.
Oh, yeah. I mean, Kevin McGuire and Paul Galassi live here around here, and those are some pretty big names if you ask me.
Kirk Busick, Gail Simone.
That's right.
Matt Fraction, Kelly Sue DeConnick.
Yes, Brian Michael Bendis as well. They all call Portland their home. Everyone in comics, come live in Portland.
And if you can't make it to Portland, come to Kansas City. We've got a great Kansas City group out there right now. They like to refer to themselves as the Kansas City Mafia.
Oh, boy.
So, we've got our histories. But
okay.
No, we've got a great community out there. Jason Aaron and Freddie Williams.
Oh,
and,
Jason Aaron's terrific.
Yeah. Dennis Hopeless. And we've got some guys kind of in the... they're part of the Kansas City group, even though they live a little further out. But guys like Phil Hester and Andy Parts, and it's a really great community that we've got there, and I see a lot of it here in Portland too. So, all right, well, you and I have been brainstorming this project for some time now, and I think we're getting very close to pulling the trigger and getting the first episode of our new podcast out.
Yeah. This is a perfect coalition, I think, of the Essential Showcase blog and Comic Reflections as a podcast. We're going to go through the, 1985 or 6?
I think it started in 86 because it started with the 25th anniversary of Marvel.
Yes, we're going to be going through the Marvel Saga, one issue at a time. I think we're going to try it as a monthly show, so we'll milk that for a couple of years.
Yeah.
And basically going through that early history of Marvel Comics or the Marvel Universe.
Yeah. When I was rereading Marvel Saga, and just to kind of fill some people in who might not be familiar with that title.
Oh, yes.
Because, I mean, realistically, we're talking about a book that's 30 years old now, and even that book was telling stories that were 25 years old.
Right.
Marvel Saga came out when Marvel was celebrating their 25th anniversary, and they were trying...
I should say 25 years from 1961.
Yes. Start of
from the birth of the
Marvel Universe. Yeah. And it was trying to go through and chronologically tell the Marvel history story as it was at that point. There's been things that have now been retconned even further in, like at that point we didn't know Wolverine's origin. So
right, and I love having reread that recent issue or recently that first issue. I love how they alluded to Conan, Red Sonja, and Kull being there, but not naming them because they couldn't because it's a licensed property. Yeah, but it's been a long time since I've read the book. I wonder if Rom pops up.
I don't know.
Yeah,
but even at that point, the big thing was that they worked Alpha Flight into the early days.
Yeah, and I appreciated
the formation of that. And it kind of give you that whole timeline of Fantastic Four, Thor, Ant-Man, Hulk. And it was just it was a 32-page no ads, so you got story the whole time. Occasionally you'd get some new art.
Yeah,
but
I think the splash pages were new, but then everything else was reprinted panels with some new text to kind of connect everything.
Yeah.
And I thought that was just a wonderful project. Really a terrific book. Marvel and DC tended to have like one starts a cool thing and the other does an equivalent. Marvel did Ohatmu and then DC did Who's Who. And it's disappointing DC didn't do a book like that as well. Yeah. Because that's something we could do in a couple of years.
At that same time, that was when DC was doing Crisis.
Yeah.
And once they got done, they were getting rid of the different universes, going to one streamlined universe. They had that History of the DC Comics 2-issue deluxe format
with
book.
George Perez and Marv Wolfman.
Yeah.
That is a wonderful book.
And that was like a very much essential reading for anyone that was on board DC following post-Crisis.
And that was a great book because it was... I think it allowed you to have the notion that Crisis didn't erase everything that had gone before. It's just the characters didn't remember what had happened, but everything pre-Crisis happened, just at an earlier point in the timeline before the reality shifted, and that's really good because DC's done lots of reboots since then. I mean, 0 Hour ironed out some of the problems with Post Crisis, and then they have Infinite Crisis, and then Final Crisis, and then Flashpoint, and then now Rebirth. I'm on board for Rebirth.
I've read everything up to date. There's parts of it I really like. Parts of it are, it's okay. Yeah. But it definitely feels much better than the New 52.
Yeah. Well, I read the 80-page giant, the one shot, and that gave me chills. This feels like DC Comics again. Yeah. And I'm trade waiting, but I'm like really looking forward to reading the Superman books, especially because I'm tired of the monster with glowing red eyes that doesn't feel like Superman.
The one that I'm going to recommend to you is Superwoman.
Yeah, I've heard that's good.
That book feels like it's a child of Kurt Swan that has been teleported out of the 1970s.
Sold.
And Phil Jimenez does the writing and the artwork on it.
Oh, well, that guy's great. He did a terrific run on Wonder Woman.
Yes.
A lot of people call him George Perez Jr.
I do, too.
And that's...
and he'll freely admit to it. He'll take it. I've seen those two at shows together, and Phil will call George Dad, and George will call Phil Son, and
that's very sweet. And if you ever get a chance to meet George, he is a saint,
very much
a prince of a guy.
Yeah. Well, we don't have an official release date for our first episode, and we'll come up with a catchy name for it.
Well, we might just call it the Marvel Saga.
Yeah, we could do that.
But I mean, tentatively, we could say it'll be out in October.
Yeah,
first one.
Yep.
And
we'll probably put it up on each of our feeds.
Yes, I think we should continue to do that, and encourage anyone listening to check out the
Worst Comic Podcast Ever feed, as well as the Comic Reflections feed. And,
yes.
I know Worst Comic Podcast Ever, everything can be found on our website, worstcomicpodcastever.com. If we had been really smart, we would have picked a shorter name. Because it gets to be a pain to write it out all the time.
Well, yeah. And branding is a difficult thing.
Yeah.
If I had been smarter, I would have picked a name for my show that kind of like spelled it out a little more what it was about.
Yeah, we sat down that first night trying to come up with names for the podcast, and we came up with a lot of really good names, but unfortunately people were already using those really good names.
Yes,
so.
that will happen. That will happen.
All right, so anything else we want to share?
Oh, gosh. I think that should be about it, Jerry.
All right.
That I can think
well,
of.
let's just give people places to go to get started. Where can people find Comic Reflections? Website, iTunes.
We don't really do a website. I mean, we have a blog spot on WordPress, so you can find us there. But iTunes or Stitcher Radio are really the best places. A lot of our earlier material is no longer on our feed, but you can find a lot of that on YouTube.
Okay.
And we're also partnered with the Outhousers website, and that they're good people. If you like a lot of snarky, it's like the Onion of comics. Yes. So that's a fun website to go to there if you want more than just old comic book talk. But I mean, why would you, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. But
I love their little update of how many days DC has gone without doing something stupid.
Yeah, yeah, that is loads of fun. And I love DC, but man, they stumble so much.
Yeah.
But I think they're on a great upswing of late, and that makes me very happy. But yeah, you can also find us on Twitter at Comic Reflection with no S, because we didn't have enough characters. And we have a Facebook page. You like us on Facebook, and also a Facebook group, which is Comic Reflections Podcast Discussion Group. Very,
yeah.
It's not confusing.
If you search for Comic Reflections, both the regular page and the discussion group are going to come up in the search feed.
Yeah.
So.
And I encourage listeners to really come attack me personally if I have made any snafus on air.
I've shared a note or two.
And honestly, I appreciate it.
Yeah.
You know, I do my best to do my research, but even Noble Homer nodded once or twice.
Yeah. Well, you know, and especially we have found, you know, you get on the mic and you're talking, and like anything else, sometimes your mind just goes blank, or you get fixated on something, and you're recording and spewing things so wrong, and then someone 2 days later will send you a note. It's like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I did that.
Oh yeah. I have transposed character or creator names unintentionally. Or I remember an early episode, I couldn't remember what planet Brainiac was from. How embarrassing.
Well, Worst Comic Podcast Ever. You can find our show on iTunes as well as on our website. We are on Facebook. We're on Twitter and Instagram. Look for @WCPE Ever. Again, so many characters.
Of course.
You know, got to have the limits. So, and, you know, look for us at shows. We set up at a lot of cons, both West Coast and throughout the Midwest. And if anyone's listening, we'd love you to come up and introduce yourselves and let us know what you like about the show, and give us feedback, because a lot of stuff we end up talking about on our show comes from feedback from listeners saying, hey, I want to hear you all talk about this. And it's like, all right, sure, we'll do that. So, all right. Well, until we meet again, Nicholas, it has been so good getting to hang out with you this weekend.
It's been a pleasure, Jerry.
It's one of those we've traded email messages and Facebook messages, and this is our first time in the 2 years of our discussions back and forth that we've gotten to meet face to face.
That's right. And it's been a big happy moment for me, Jerry.
Yeah.
So I just want to let these listeners know they can look forward to the Marvel Saga coming very soon as a co-production of the Worst Comics Podcast Ever and Comic Reflections.
Sounds good. Well, we will see you soon.
All righty.
All right.